Have you ever heard of a killer who left messages at his crime scenes, taunting police and pleading for the killing to stop? Today we're diving into the story of the lipstick killer, William Heirens, whose twisted words ultimately led to his downfall. But what drove this young man to kill? And how did his own chilling message bring him to justice? Our story takes place in Chicago in 1945, just as the city was beginning to recover from the effects of World War II. At the time, 17-year-old William Heirens was a troubled yet bright young man from a stable family, studying at the University of Chicago. But behind this seemingly ordinary student's face lurked a dark side that would shock the city. Between 1945 and 1946, Chicago was shaken by a string of brutal crimes that seemed almost too horrific to be true. Heirens was soon linked to the murders of 3 people. Josephine Ross, a 43-year-old woman found dead in her apartment. Frances Brown, whose body was discovered in a similarly brutalized condition. And finally, 6-year-old Suzanne Degnan, who was kidnapped and killed in a case that brought the entire city to its knees. The murders followed a disturbing pattern. Victims were found in their homes, indicating the killer was able to bypass security and gain entry, either by breaking in or slipping through an unlocked door. Once inside, he would violently attack his victims, often stabbing them repeatedly. Each crime scene was gruesome, with clear signs of rage and brutality, suggesting that the killer was driven by deep-seated psychological issues. But the case took an even darker turn when police arrived at the scene of Frances Brown's murder. Written in red lipstick on her apartment wall was a haunting message. For heaven's sake, catch me before I kill more. I cannot control myself. This single message both terrified and mystified the city. It suggested that the killer himself was begging to be stopped, revealing a mind at war with itself. Psychologists examining the message speculated that the murderer was suffering from a severe mental disturbance, likely a dissociative disorder, or even schizophrenia, which might cause him to lose control and commit horrific acts. The lipstick killer name came from this chilling note, which became a defining piece of evidence in the hunt for the murderer. But beyond the eerie plea, what really troubled investigators was the signature itself. The red lipstick smeared on the wall seemed symbolic of the killer's rage and self-loathing, as if he were both horrified and enthralled by his actions. This signature would later help link the crimes back to Heirens. Following this grisly discovery, the city's police force was on high alert. With public fear mounting, detectives launched an extensive investigation, combing through crime scenes, questioning potential suspects, and searching for forensic clues. However, they were up against the limitations of the 1940s, a time when forensic science was far from what it is today. Nevertheless, detectives found an important lead: fingerprints on the door of Brown's apartment. These partial prints would eventually become crucial to the case, though they didn't lead directly to the suspect at first. But the investigation truly cracked open when, months later, police apprehended William Heirens for a burglary in a nearby area. While in custody, authorities noticed his striking resemblance to a composite sketch of the lipstick killer, which had been based on witness descriptions. Suspicion quickly grew, and detectives began digging deeper into Heirens' background. To their shock, they discovered that Heirens had a long history of thefts and petty crimes, and he had shown a strange fascination with violence, often talking about murder with his classmates. Yet Heirens' psychological state was even more unsettling. Friends and acquaintances described him as someone who could seem charming one moment and eerily detached the next. Psychologists analyzing Heirens after his arrest noted that he displayed signs of schizophrenia or dissociative identity disorder. During questioning, he exhibited memory lapses, claiming he couldn't recall committing any murders. He even suggested that he had an alter ego named George, who he claimed was responsible for the killings. This George persona, he said, acted on violent impulses that Heirens felt he could not control. Detectives didn't initially buy the story, suspecting it was a ploy to gain sympathy. But psychological tests did reveal that Heirens suffered from severe mental health issues, though the exact diagnosis was debated. The young man seemed to inhabit a fractured world of his own, one where violence was a response to internal chaos. In a time before the kind of DNA evidence we have today, detectives relied heavily on fingerprint matching. Heirens' prints were compared to those found at the Brown crime scene. In a breakthrough moment, they found a match. This link established Heirens' presence at the scene, further strengthening the case against him. Investigators also examined Heirens' handwriting and found disturbing similarities between his writing style and the lipstick message on Brown's wall. As the case built up against Heirens, his psychological state remained a focal point. He continued to claim that George was the real culprit. But under the weight of evidence, he eventually confessed to the murders, albeit with some reluctance. Many wondered if his confession was coerced, whether he truly remembered the killings, or if he was taking the blame under psychological duress. But despite the uncertainty surrounding his mental state, the evidence was irrefutable. During the trial, prosecutors used the fingerprint match, the handwriting analysis, and Heirens' own confessions to paint a picture of a deeply disturbed young man unable or unwilling to resist his violent urges. The lipstick message, "For heaven's sake, catch me before I kill more," became a symbol of his fractured psyche, a cry for help buried beneath layers of brutality. It illustrated a twisted battle between his own morality and his darkest impulses, a plea that eventually led to his downfall. In 1946, Heirens was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. His sentence was controversial. Many believed that he should have received psychological help instead of life behind bars. Over the years, Heirens maintained his innocence, claiming that he was framed and that his confession was the result of intense police pressure. He even filed multiple appeals, but they were unsuccessful, and he remained in prison until his death in 2012. The lipstick killer case became a landmark in criminal psychology and forensic investigation. It highlighted the complexities of mental illness in the context of violent crime and raised questions about the ethics of confessions and the treatment of mentally ill criminals. Forensic evidence played a crucial role in securing Heirens' conviction, and the case became an early example of how psychological profiling could assist in understanding the motives and minds of killers. Ultimately, the lipstick killer's story reminds us of the fragile line between sanity and madness, and the horrifying consequences when that line is crossed. The haunting message left in red lipstick remains a testament to the tragic psyche of a killer who begged to be stopped. But it also leaves us with one final question. Could William Heirens have been saved from himself if society had intervened sooner? And how many other crimes might be prevented if we listen carefully to the cries for help hidden within the darkness?